Hello, welcome everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, probably for about half of you. Happy Tuesday. I'm gonna let folks get into the room here. All right. Well, I'm gonna get us started. Welcome everyone. I am so pleased to welcome you to the National Assessment Center Association's webinar that unveils the Assessment Center Outcome Reporting Network, or what we call ACORN, the pilot results, and really is an attempt for us to lay out a path forward for both the field and assessment centers that is based off of what we've learned over the last 18 months, off of lessons learned and recommendations that you'll learn about today. My name is Molly Barker Cook. I am the Executive Director of the National Assessment Center Association. And I'm joined today by an amazing panel of leaders and experts, including Hunter Hurst, who's the director of the National Center for Juvenile Justice, Dr. Jeff Kretschmar, who is a consultant with this project, but is also a research associate professor with Case Western University in Ohio and does a lot of work with assessment centers within the state of Ohio. Ryan Berry, who's the Director of Strategic Initiatives with Joint Initiatives for Youth and Families in Colorado, who is a participant in the ACORN cohort. Jonathan Schaefer, who's the Data Coordinator with the Multi-Agency Resource Center in Calcasieu Parish, Louisiana, also a participant of the ACORN cohort. And last but not least, Corey Shreve, who's the Community Reinvestment Bureau Chief for the Ohio Department of Youth Services. So we have an action-packed or an information-packed, I guess Zoom can't really be action-packed or limited capability there, an information-packed hour. So I'm going to jump right into the agenda and get us kicked off. We do plan to leave some time at the end for questions, so use the Q&A function if you can. We'll do our best to monitor the chat, but that's the best way to get questions answered. The other thing that I'll say here is there is a full report that was released that can provide a lot more detail into what we're going to talk about today. I'm linking that here in the chat. And so feel free to reference that after the webinar, during the webinar, but this will provide some additional context as we're chatting today. And then the last thing that I just want to note, this entire cohort and the webinar would not be possible without the support from the State Justice Institute. So a big thank you to them both for their support on this project the last 18 months, but also for the impact that it's going to have for the years to come. So, all right. So the agenda for today, I'm going to give you a really brief overview of the ACORN pilot. Both Jonathan and Ryan are going to share from their perspective as participants within the cohort what this last 12 to 18 months was like for them and how it's being implemented locally. Hunter is going to provide us a summary of lessons learned and recommendations from a TA team perspective. And then Jeff and Corey are going to talk a little bit about ACORN Ohio and what is going to be happening in 2025. And then I'll wrap us up with next steps and questions. So a little bit of context of ACORN and what led us here and the cohort in general. So ACORN, again, it's the Assessment Center Outcome Reporting Network. It is a reporting mechanism that allows assessment centers to capture essential data points that align with the assessment center framework. And for those of you who may not be familiar, the assessment center framework was created about 5 years ago, and it's really guidance to the field. It outlines what the core components of an assessment center are, what are the best practices and standards. It's an updated guidance to the field, updated from the 90s. And so ACORN is really a tool that was developed that is developed out of the framework. And it defines what those common data points and the outcome measures are that align with the framework so that assessment centers can communicate, who are they serving, how are they serving youth and families, and what's the impact that they're making on youth and families and community. So one important reason for ACORN that we dive a little bit more into on the next slide is assessment centers have really grown organically over the last 30 years. From the mid-90s to today, we have over 100 assessment centers across the country. And that organic growth created some challenges in the way that data was collected and outcome measures were communicated by assessment centers. The 30 years of organic growth really created a spectrum and a continuum of what assessment centers were capturing. And so the framework and ACORN is really a way for us to provide some more consistency and to speak to collective impact. When we're talking about what an assessment center does and the impact that we're making, we're not speaking of something completely different when we're talking about one in Georgia versus one in Nevada versus one in Colorado. And so for this project, there were 6 assessment centers that were selected through an application process that were really convened to test the reporting mechanism, test ACORN, and to understand if the data elements in ACORN were useful, were they relevant, were they manageable, and for us as a TA team to really get an understanding of what is the lift that assessment center needs to have or has to have in order to complete ACORN and what kind of support is necessary to do so. So these 6 assessment centers that you see on your screen here were the 6 that were a part of the cohort. 2 of them are here to talk to you today. But you'll see, there's not only diversity, kind of geographic diversity, but as we get into the weeds here, you'll see each center was really different in the way that they served their community. Some were really focused on prevention, some diversion, some early intervention. And they had diversity in terms of their data capacity and capabilities, right? Some of these assessment centers had really advanced data management systems, and some of them were, using kind of paper and Excel. And we selected the diversity of the centers for us as a TA team to really get a sense of what type of support was needed to the field and to make sure that we got a wide range of feedback as we went through this process. So again, the why I already kind of talked about, we really had a difference in the data and the outcome measures that were being collected by assessment centers. And so this was our attempt to really help assessment centers not only improve the quality and the usefulness of their data, but also create more consistency in what was being collected by assessment centers and how they were measuring outcomes that aligns with the assessment center framework. The technical assistance team for this project was myself with the association, Hunter Hurst, who you'll hear from today, but also Jean Siegel, both from the National Center for Juvenile Justice, and Dr. Jeff Kretschmar, again, who you'll hear from later. So the structure that the cohort had was each center was assigned a TA expert, either Hunter, Jean, or Jeff. And they were supported in completing the various sections of ACORN, which I'll show you here what those are here in a minute. And again, part of this was us to understand and for them to understand, was ACORN, number one, useful to them as a center? Were the data points relevant, and did they feel like it was capturing the work that they were doing? And was it manageable? What we didn't want this to be was, a huge inconvenience to where it would never be used, right? And so along with that, what were internal processes and procedures and policies that needed to be changed? What was some changes that needed to be made to data management systems? And so they were supported in developing action plans that outlined what those changes were, in order to complete ACORN. And just as importantly, it was a learning mechanism for us as the TA team, right? For us to know, did we have to make changes to ACORN? And we did. And what type of support did assessment center need? So it really was, TA to the assessment centers, but really a feedback and a learning mechanism for us. So just really quickly, I'm not going to get into the weeds on, the details of ACORN and what it looks like, but I think it is important for you to see here the different sections of ACORN. So we have 4 sections. You'll see 3 of them are the exact core components within the assessment center framework. So single point of contact, screening, assessment, and case management are the 3 process core components of an assessment center. And then in addition to that, we have long-term outcomes. So single point of contact, we're really asking who's being referred to the assessment center by who, for what, and what are the demographics of those young people. We also ask some questions around engagement here. Screening and assessment, we're really trying to collect data on what are the needs and strengths that are being identified in the screening and assessment process. And for case management, how are we linking youth and families to community-based services? What types of services and supports are we connecting youth and families to that match those needs and strengths? And for long-term outcomes, we're really looking at, not only are we looking at escalation into the justice system, but also are youth and families more connected to community? In all 4 of these sections, we are gathering youth and family feedback, not just taking data from the assessment center, right? So we're really asking youth and families, did you feel heard during the screening and assessment process? Did you have input? Under case management, were you able to connect with the services and supports? And did you find them useful? And then long-term outcomes, what kind of changes are we seeing 12 months down the line, in addition to capturing escalation into the justice system? So all of these components are captured in ACORN, and the data points, accompanies those sections. This is just a screenshot to show you kind of the complexity. This is single point of contact. So we recognize that assessment centers serve their communities in different ways. So we have prevention, diversion, and early intervention referrals, and then who's referring for what and demographics underneath that. So there was a lot of, just to show you the complexity, there was a lot of data points and a lot of kind of back and forth with the centers and their TA experts on how to really use their internal processes and their data management systems in order to get this information. So I'm going to stop there for the sake of time because I want you to be able to hear from Jonathan and Ryan. And so Jonathan, I'll hand it over to you to give a little bit more detailed information about what this was like for you all.
Awesome. Well, I'm Jonathan Schaefer. I'm a data coordinator here at Calcasieu Parish at the Office of Juvenile Justice Services. If we want to hop over to the next slide, to just give you a brief rundown of where we are and what we do. We serve a little over 200,000 people here in Calcasieu Parish, and that is around 26,000 school-age youth. And we serve 6 municipalities and 9 law enforcement agencies. If we want to jump in, the Multi-Agency Resource Center, which is our intake wing that handles all of our assessment center operations. We've been operating since 2011. And like I said, they handle all intakes, whether that be law enforcement, delinquent diversions, or status. We've got a pretty extensive voluntary referral system now and handles all of our walk-ins. And since we've opened, we've served nearly 19,000 youth at our MARC Center. You can see a lovely photo of me back when I was the receptionist there. So prior to the ACORN, most of our data collection was either gathered through our data management software. We utilized Tyler Technologies Enterprise Supervision. But as far as our detailed assessment center information, almost all of that has, since 2011, has been utilized in a spreadsheet from Excel. Now that's been expanded and kind of cut down over the years as we kind of determined what was useful data points. But prior to the ACORN, that was where all of our MERC data was housed. Now, since then, we at the beginning of the ACORN, I think we initially saw that there was a lot of value in the data we were going to be collecting, but utilizing that spreadsheet was going to be difficult. We were going to have to add a lot more data points and collect a lot more data along the way. So we kind of searched around trying to find another solution. And over the course of the ACORN, we actually developed an application in Microsoft Power Apps that our MARC officers are now utilizing to input data into that then gets dumped into another spreadsheet that helps us complete the ACORN data collection process. Um, let me see. Now, if we want to move forward here. Now, the big benefits we saw throughout the ACORN process, Mr. Hunter Hurst here was our TA that helped CalCSU kind of guide us through that process. Because it was a big undertaking at the beginning. We kind of, I think, bit off a little more than we could chew early on, trying to develop that application. We also moved forward with fully automating the completion of the ACORN, so it was a lot of moving parts in the beginning, but being able to talk back and forth with Hunter and Molly definitely helped us through that. Um, I also had the opportunity to communicate directly with several other organizations that were also participating in the ACORN, and having that kind of sounding board to talk back and forth was hugely beneficial. And I think one thing that I didn't really see the value of early on was just the opportunity for growth that this afforded us. Without this ACORN, we probably would have just kept using that spreadsheet we had before from now until the end of time, would have been happy with it. But this really kind of challenged us to evolve what we were doing and get a lot more thorough data. So if we want to move on to our challenges. Now, very early on when we were trying to figure out what we were going to do for data collection, we did run into a couple hiccups. There was previously a Microsoft Excel data collection tool called Surveys that we initially swapped everything to, built all that out, sent it out to our officers. And then about 2 weeks later, Microsoft decided to discontinue that feature. So we kind of moped around and we're really sad about that. And that's when we discovered the Power Apps and kind of built that all of that out. And then the automation of the spreadsheet in tandem with the sign-in application was quite the undertaking. It took some time, but once it was all put together, it was really invaluable to us as far as data collection, data display. We now have real-time access to data that we previously would only be looking at once a quarter, once a year. So I just added in here that it can be as easy or as hard as you want it to be. We could have easily just, grabbed whatever data we had, slapped it in the spreadsheet, sent it off, and called it a day. But we saw a lot of value in this data and what it was going to do for us. So we kind of spent more time to kind of flesh it out and get it into a state that we could utilize it on a more regular basis. And moving forward with the ACORN, we're definitely going to maintain those networking connections that we got. I think that's been hugely beneficial. And we definitely want to keep that going. And as far as the actual data collection, it's become the default way that we collect data at the agency. It was primarily used for the MARC Center and our assessment center, but we're now using the tools that we've kind of developed and the lessons that we've learned, and we're expanding that to our other departments to collect data and utilize data in a very similar manner. So it's definitely something we're going to keep utilizing moving forward.
Thanks, Jonathan. And I know if you have specific questions for Jonathan, again, feel free to use the Q&A function because we'll hold some time at the end. We really wanted to make sure, so Jonathan mentioned that the MARC in Calcasieu Parish has been opened since 2014, right, Jonathan? 2015?
2011.
Sorry, 2011. Thank you. So clearly has had, time to kind of evolve and has evolved over that time serving youth and families. In contrast, which is why we wanted Ryan to join, because the assessment center there in the Fourth Judicial District in Colorado, which was is about Colorado Springs. I'm sure Ryan will get into the details of geographics, but is at the very early stages and was a brand new center, not yet serving youth and families. So I think hearing from both Jonathan and Ryan on their experiences and the contrast of where they are is really helpful. So Ryan, go ahead.
Alrighty, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ryan. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives here at Joint Initiatives for Youth and Families. So we can just go ahead and just jump right into it and get to the next slide. So to just give you all a little bit of background, Joint Initiatives has actually been active in El Paso County, providing services from early childhood to early adulthood for over a decade. So kind of on the early childhood side of things, which is where I got my start here at Joint Initiatives. We are the local coordinating organization administering the state of Colorado's Universal Preschool Program in El Paso County. Then we also offer coaching, licensing help, and some financial aid for early childhood providers who are interested in becoming licensed. And then over on the juvenile side of things, we've had a program for many years called the Pathways Program. And that's where we provide a lot of our juvenile services. So through the Pathways Program, we provide something called ISSTs, or Individualized Service and Support Teams. That is managed through the state of Colorado's Collaborative Management Program. We also offer care coordination and then high fidelity wraparound with one of our partners called Mission Possible. We've recognized that there is a real need for additional services here in El Paso County. This is the second largest county in Colorado. We have around 744,000 people, around 136,000 of whom are school-age children. And there isn't really anything like an assessment center here in El Paso County. There is one up in Denver. So we really thought that, given the fact that we're the second largest county, that there really was a need for us to go ahead and open something like that here. So in addition to the Juvenile Assessment Center, which we've named the Ascend Center, which will be opening in January of 2025, we'll also be opening up a runaway and homeless youth shelter. So kind of similar to Jonathan had mentioned, before ACORN, our organization was primarily almost exclusively tracking data using either physical forms or spreadsheets. And we'll talk a little bit more about kind of how we moved away from that and moved to having stuff a little bit more automated and more online. We decided to be a part of the ACORN cohort, as Molly had kind of mentioned, given the fact that we are a brand new center that's opening up. And we were hoping to kind of have something give us a really useful framework from which we could begin doing our work and begin collecting this data for the assessment center. We did find that overall the cohort was incredibly helpful in guiding us as we develop our new data management system, developing the data map that's also going to kind of visualize where all of this data is going to be flowing, and then a data sharing agreement as well that we've developed for some of our community partners. So given the fact that we hadn't opened as an assessment center quite yet, we had primarily been using mock data when completing the ACORN worksheet, which was a little bit of a challenge. But having the TA help was really helpful in completing the ACORN worksheet, and then also in developing that data action plan that kind of got us where we really needed to be. So like I said, ACORN was incredibly revealing for us that our data management system, the way that it worked, was not going to be sufficient for us. It was kind of spreadsheets all over the place. Asking different staff for different data points was kind of a nightmare. So it was very much all over the place. So at bare minimum, we recognized that we really needed to streamline some things. And in the process of streamlining, and in our experience with the ACORN cohort, I think we kind of recognized that it was really necessary for us to actually get like a dedicated database system. Just doing things off of spreadsheets, we got to a point where it was not really feasible, given the scale of work that we're hoping to do to continue doing it on spreadsheets. So I think I mentioned at the beginning, we are opening up a runaway and homeless youth shelter, which got us access to a national database called HMIS, the Homeless Management Information System, the local version of which is called Clarity. And that is the database that we will primarily be using at both the Ascend Center and at the Runaway Homeless Youth Shelter that's going to be opening working as well. So this is a really, really great platform as far as database management systems are concerned. And probably the best part of it is that it's free. And so we have actually been able to customize our HMIS quite a bit. And we've been using basically all of the sheets within ACORN we've been using to a certain degree in developing the different programs within HMIS. So single point of contact, case management, and outcomes. We have used all of those sheets in developing these programs within HMIS. So we could go ahead and go to the next slide. So here's just our Jack data map that we were able to develop as part of the ACORN cohort. I won't go fully into the weeds on this, but this was very, very helpful in kind of visualizing the path that we were imagining most of the clients that would be referred to the Juvenile Assessment Center, the Ascend Center, kind of the path that the majority of them would follow. So you can see up at the top here, it begins with either arrival or referral to either the Jack or the shelter. They then go through a screening process where all of that client data is collected, their name, their date of birth, demographics, medical history, psychiatric history, kind of everything under there will be collected during that initial screening. They then will be referred to services, and this is kind of where it gets a little bit complicated because Joint Initiatives is the administrator of the Juvenile Assessment Center, and we do offer direct services. But then we also have partners who are going to be housed within the Ascend Center. And so when a youth gets referred to the Juvenile Assessment Center, they could be either referred to Joint Initiative services, partner services, or potentially both. And so during that process, we want to make sure that all of our data is being shared. So that's kind of where the data sharing agreement comes in, so that we make sure that our community partners and then we as the Jack administrator, we have all of the information that we need in order to provide streamlined services to youth, to make sure that all community partners are kind of on the same page, and then for any reporting that we might need to do on the services that have been completed for those youth. So that's just an overview of the Jack data map. Like I said, I didn't want to go too much into the weeds, and I'm happy to share that with anybody who would want a copy of it. So we can go to the next slide. So ACORN was incredibly helpful in helping us develop this data sharing agreement. So like I said, it's a little bit complicated at the Ascend Center. So Joint Initiatives administers the Ascend Center, and we do provide quite a bit of services within the Ascend Center. So we're going to be continuing to offer those ISSTs, those care coordinations, the high fidelity wraparounds. But then our partners also offer a very wide range of services, educational services, tutoring services, mentoring services. We're even going to have an organization that's going to be in here helping kids out with cooking classes and other after-school activities. So there's going to be a lot happening here. So given the fact that it's Joint Initiatives administering the center, and then we have a lot of partners in there, we did really need a data sharing agreement. So ACORN was incredibly helpful in helping us develop this. So we were able to define everything that we wanted to be shared between community partners. We defined what that data management system is going to be like. So all of our partners are also going to be using HMIS with us sponsoring them. That data management system also kind of goes into the weeds about data protection, data access, and then potentially any protocols for data breaches. So we do have internal processes that we will be following, and then also in terms of compliance with HMIS, there's a lot that we have to follow as well for data access, protocols for data breaches, protection, and those types of things in order for us to be in compliance with our federal standards. So we have kind of those internal things, but then also federal standards that we have to be in compliance with as well. And so that data sharing agreement outlines all of that. And I would say that overall, ACORN has been incredibly helpful for us. That data action plan that we used during the ACORN cohort was absolutely one of the primary tools that we were using when we were setting up our new data management system for the Ascend Center. Like I said, it was a little bit challenging given the fact that we were primarily using mock data, but it really, really did help guide us moving forward. And it really did provide us that incredibly useful framework as we were developing the different program modules within Clarity. It also helped us realize that we really needed to have a dedicated data analyst team. I am the team right now. Fortunately, we will have a bigger team at the beginning of next year. We're actually going to have a team of 3. So that's going to be really great for us. I think that's going to be helpful for us reporting more data going forward. And we're absolutely going to continue using the insights gained through ACORN participation as we continue to launch and learn more things going forward this year. So we're really excited about it and really happy to have been part of ACORN.
Thanks so much, Ryan. And I know Hunter's going to build on your dedicated data analysis moving forward too. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. So I'm going to hand it over to Hunter, who is going to go over. So Ryan and Jonathan were two centers out of six. So we took the last 12 to 18 months with six assessment centers. And Hunter's really going to go over broadly what were some of the main lessons learned and what are the recommendations that we have, both for the field in general, but also for assessment centers specifically. So, Hunter, I'll hand it to you.
Thank you, Molly. In the next 10 minutes, and in 4 slides, I want to interest you in accessing the report that Molly wrote. We provided input, but she primarily wrote, um, and is an excellent report of findings from this demonstration project. One of the better that I have seen over the years in terms of distilling the findings and the recommendations. You'll see reflections of what Jonathan and Ryan shared in the lessons learned and the recommendations. And I just want to, before I start, say that they are just all of the six demonstration sites were stars in this project. I entered it with a lot of skepticism. Could this be done? We had an early version of the ACORN. It seemed, oh gosh, overwhelming. Knowing something about assessment centers and how diverse they can be in their structure, I had a lot of concerns that this demonstration could succeed early on. And I'm happy to say my skepticism was peeled away as we went through the process. So, in terms of lessons learned, I really feel like the metaphor for the acorn is a great one, and it's true to the name of it too: Assessment Center Outcome Reporting Network. The network that evolved in this 18 months, which sounds like a long time, but it's not that long for training, education, going through a process, a data reporting process like this. It's not a long time. So that network really came together. And I feel like we're kind of coming from an acorn, maybe, and we got a sapling growing here in terms of a national network. It's a big nation. We've got six that were able to do this and put, whether it was mock data, like Ryan described, because they're on the drawing board, or it was real data quarterly, as Jonathan described. The domains, each time we had those domains, lesson two, I was like, oh, this one's going to be the one that we get stuck on, that we can't do. And each time I was proven wrong by all six of the network participants. The peer networking was essential. I happened to be the coach for both Jonathan and Ryan's jurisdictions, and I could quickly start kind of cross networking them with each other to problem solve, and sometimes it was programmatic things, that they shared, because data is connected to the business process. So, if they're stuck on programming, especially as you're lifting up an assessment center, then you've got to overcome that to be able to shape the data. Uh, uh, on lesson four, the motivations stayed high through the whole process, all the way to the what I thought was going to be the toughest lift, and I think was the long-term outcomes aspect of the acorn. And nobody flagged, and that survived through staff changes in some of the position changes and some of the things that happen. Life happens, and they hung with it the whole way. Um, it the lesson five, the affordability and the adaptability of it, I feel like was proven through the demonstration. You have two of the data capacity, so data analyst position. So finding six, that you really do need a data position to do this, and And you just heard Ryan close and how that's growing for them and how this kind of gave that this framework helped in that process potentially. Next slide. So a lot of recommendations, and I'm gonna jump to 12 here in the interest of time because I want to leave plenty of time for the recommendations and then also from our for our friends from Ohio. So I'm going to skip to 12. As interest in assessment centers grow around the country, this is really imperative, and I feel like our two panelists here went through the experience, kind of reflect that, and if possible, at the earliest possible stages, to have kind of what every assessment center should be accountable for at a core level. Everybody's going to have different environments and need some flexibility, but to having some common language and a growing network of jurisdictions speaking that language is critical. And on to recommendations. Okay, so our recommendations, there's 5 to the field, overarching recommendations, and then 3 to specific to assessment centers. So um, we hope that this great progress, this great start on the really difficult task of data collection and uniform data collection and data use continues through the network. The network continues to expand through the NAC, and the peer network of sharing that was, sounds like magical in some instances in this project, in terms of workarounds, low cost workarounds, tools, tips, the things that are needed to climb the mountain of information and performance measurement. Um, we feel like there are states that are investing heavily in assessment centers. You're going to hear from one of those after me. And finding state partners kind of it will help cement that network where there's common ground. The state has its needs for reporting, and then there is this national network for reporting. Then recommendation 3 is to continue developing effective tools. Some of the tools that Jonathan described and through the hard experiences they had and the dead ends they hit, and then the pathways they found a way, around that, and then the sharing and the handing off of that they did, actually integrating it into the final product of the ACORN, is critical. And there's more. There's more of that kind of interconnective tissue and muscle that needs to be developed. We need to continue exploring effective methods for gathering youth and family feedback. So the NAC provides a great starting place for that. That is embedded in terms of the output into the ACORN. But getting high response rates was some of the peer network and sharing in terms of what technology to use, what procedures to use to get good, candid feedback, but a decent enough return on it that you feel like it's reliable to use for improving the program. So qualitative information is important. The business process is important, but the voices of caretakers, parents, and the young people, of course, is critical. And then the 5th recommendation is to support assessment center community by developing networks and resources that support the data sharing and the help to track outcomes, but also protect the privacy of youth and families. So the way to roll that up is the discussion at the end of Ryan's presentation about information sharing agreements. So some of the nature of assessment centers and the nature of juvenile justice in general is that interagency collaboration. You're going to sometimes, to answer certain questions or get certain data items, you're going to need partners, strong data sharing agreements to reach kind of the highest level of the ACORN attainment. And then finally, 3 recommendations to the field. We hope that you take this and then you take the report, you take the ACORN itself, and you adapt it to your environment, your situation, as you just heard Jonathan and Ryan share. You're going to have to, one of the great things about this project was it included a cohort of places that were on the drawing board, well established, those using enterprise systems, those on paper or mostly on physical records. And you got to, then there needs to be a network to figure out how to meet you where you are. And this project demonstrated that's possible, and that the ACORN, in terms of the end goal, the common end goal, helped facilitate that. And the data capacity experts, like we hope that you can use this report as a resource to help you make the case for the need, the specific data analysis technology expertise, as you heard our two panelists share, to be able to do this well. And please read the report, and I'll hand it back to Molly.
Thanks, Hunter. One of the field recommendations talked about the opportunity for states that are investing in assessment centers, and how states can really bring together data reporting that aligns with the framework, that aligns with ACORN to support assessment centers locally. And so one thing that we wanted to spend a little bit of time on today, and I'll have Jeff give you some more context and introduce Corey, is that we have a state that is moving in just that direction. And so to give you a little bit of information on kind of the landscape of assessment centers in Ohio, and hearing from Corey about what their plans are for 2025. So Jeff, do you want to take it from here?
Yeah, thanks, Molly. So as Molly said, my name is Jeff Kretschmar. I work at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland and do some consulting for Molly and the NAC. I've spent about 20 years doing evaluation and research on youth justice and some other things in Ohio. And I can say in that time, Ohio has been like a national leader in juvenile justice reform. From being really early on the diversion front, with diverting appropriate youth from the system into more appropriate services, to being a pretty early partner with Annie E. Casey on that Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative, probation reform, to really why we're here today, a significant investment in assessment centers. And it's hard to know exactly how many assessment centers there are in the country. There may be like 120-ish, something is hard to say. But I can say that Ohio has 21 of them. So just in Ohio, it's, maybe 15 to 20% of all the assessment centers in the country are in Ohio. And I don't know that a lot of people would guess that. But it's that investment that guides our next step with ACORN. So to say more about that, I want to introduce Corey Shreve, who is the Bureau Chief of Community Reinvestment for the Ohio Department of Youth Services. Corey and his team lead efforts to implement evidence-informed grant programs and initiatives promoting community reinvestment for youth and families involved in the justice system in Ohio. So I'll turn it over to Corey to talk more about Ohio's investment in ACs and why they choose to make that investment, and the idea for ACORN Ohio. Corey.
Thanks, Jeff. Glad to be here today. As you can see on this map, we're heavily invested in juvenile justice reform, and we've put a heavy focus on resource and assessment centers in Ohio. I know when we first got into this business and we started to think about juvenile justice reform, one of the key strategies or core strategies of the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiatives is data, right? So I'm thankful to have Jeff working with us in Ohio to help us with that. But data has to drive the decisions we make. And we've seen the power of resource centers with just the data that we're able to collect at the local level. So we thought it would be very important to collect this at a national level and try to partner to get even better data to show the effectiveness of these centers throughout the country. And also support us in growing this initiative even more in Ohio. One thing we need to drive any type of funding we receive through the legislator to be used at the state or local level is data and outcomes. So we're fortunate to have grant funding available to help stand up assessment centers throughout Ohio. Right now, as Jeff said, we have 21, we have 17 that are in operation. And as a result of receiving funding from the Department of Youth Services, there are certain data elements that we all already require sites to collect and give us, so we can have some level of some ability to measure success in these centers. And I would just say that 80% of kids who enter a resource or assessment center in Ohio are completing the program successfully. And then over 82% don't come back and have involvement within the juvenile justice system 12 months post-program completion. Sorry, I've been talking all day today, so I apologize. So then we had the opportunity to partner with NAC to get more detailed information and data that would follow the framework of the NAC and would help us build our capacity even more. So in 2025, we're going to pilot this with 6 of our existing resource centers to get more detailed information and data collected that we'll actually build into our data management and data collection system that we're working on in Ohio. And our future plans and goals that we're working with Google to build a broad case management system that would handle all of our grants in Ohio, with hopes to build ACORN into that process and get better information to move forward. So that's kind of our overarching goal and our plan moving into 2025.
Thanks, Corey. I think for me, the really at a state level, and to be able to speak to what is the impact that assessment centers are having in their individual counties, and how can that influence or inform more work within the state, right? And how do we use ACORN to help communicate what is their impact, and how does that inform future dollars or future support to the field, even not directly into assessment centers, right? Some of the information that's coming out of assessment centers are what are some of the needs that are being identified that youth and families are struggling with, and what are community services and supports, and where are the gaps. And so how do assessment centers, how are they used to communicate what those gaps are, what those needs are that aren't being met? So I think the impact or the potential for to create feedback loops through that at a state level is huge.
Yeah, Molly, I just add that's a great point. One of the goals too is not just for local level service, but also how we can use this data collection to identify areas that have a greater need, and how we can improve cross-system partnership at the state level. How do we work better with our Department of Children and Family, or how do we work better with DD, or how do we work better with the school system too? So it's not just a juvenile justice driven initiative, but we can focus on this across the state as a whole.
Thanks, Corey. So we have about 10 minutes left. I want to make sure that I know we've got a couple of questions in the Q&A chat. So next steps really for the field. And one of the things, cohort is so many times on this page that I have to practice not using it 3 different times in a sentence. So the existing cohort that has been operating for the last 12 to 18 months, that group of assessment centers will start using ACORN for live data for quarterly reporting and outcome measurements starting January 1. So the last 12 months were kind of mock completions and test data, and they will start using ACORN January 1, 2025. You just heard from Corey and Jeff. So ACORN Ohio will launch in 2025. One of the things that we're doing prior to actually convening the cohort is to cross-reference what does the state already ask of Ohio assessment centers and what does ACORN ask, and where are the gaps and how do we align those two, and then convening the cohort to really test how ACORN Ohio can look for that in terms of state level support. But the third thing here, so we've got 3 cohorts going that to add in this third one. And one, you'll see an email come out after this webinar today, but the association will be supporting a new cohort in 2025 to bring on a new set of assessment centers across the country, not just confined to Ohio, to utilize ACORN and to start adopting that internally. I will here put a link to the application but it will also be in an email. So don't worry. If you registered for this, you should receive it. But there will be an application that's due in the middle of January for those of you in the field that want to look and begin to adopt and see how ACORN can fit into your current process and how you can adopt that internally. And then in addition to that, so let me stop chatting here and put the link to the application here in the chat so that you've got that as I finish up. In addition to that, Hunter laid out the 5 recommendations to the field. And one of the things that I know I can speak on the behalf of the association's board of directors is we are continuously exploring how do we support the field. And these recommendations that and the lessons learned is really going to drive the work of the association, right? How do we help the field implement the recommendations? How do we bring best practices in through training and resource development and technical assistance? So that's going to be just a continued focus of the organization going into 2025 and beyond. So 3 ACORN cohorts going at the same time. The existing one will be filling out, using ACORN Live, ACORN Ohio, and then the 2025 ACORN that will be kind of a broader national ACORN cohort. So with that, again, I to emphasize what Hunter said, I would highly encourage you to go through and read the report because we only had an hour here today. And so, to go over kind of all the lessons learned, all the recommendations, was a lot to cover. So if you want more information, go through. I know we have one question in here that says, who will have access to raw data entered into the system, and asking about, running reports. So let me clarify. The ACORN, it is a tool where you can enter raw data and use that internally. The association does not have access or will not be asking for raw data. It's really coming back and reporting on a national level and within the cohorts aggregate numbers. So at this point in the project, ACORN is not a data management system, right? You're not entering live client data into kind of a system that the association owns. Each individual assessment center is using your own information system and your own data collection methods to complete ACORN. So for some of you, for some of the participants that were involved in the cohort, they were entering raw data and then it auto-populated and they used that to auto-populate the ACORN report. In others that used information like more, I would say, complex information systems, they extracted the data out of their existing report or information systems through ad hoc reports, and that then fed into ACORN and completed ACORN that way. So it's really meant to be adapted to what you're currently using instead of the NAC providing the data management system. Yes, so you're submitting aggregate data. Yes, Rachel, I saw your question in the chat. Okay, I think the other question here, and Dylan, I saw, or Ryan, I saw that you clarified, but just so that everybody, it said, what was Ryan's data gathering software? And it's called Clarity. And it's a HMIS, Clarity Human Services. It's an HMIS system. Okay, let me see, make sure that if there's any other questions. Any other questions for our panelist? The link there is, just so that you all have it, in case you came after I put it in the chat. This is the link to I put that in host and panelists. Let's see. I did that to the SurveyMonkey link too. Sorry, everyone. Let me copy URL and put. So let me try this again. Here's the application for the 2025 cohort, which again will come out in email here in just a little bit later this afternoon. And then here is the link to the full report for this cohort that was funded by the State Justice Institute. Amazing. All right. I don't see any other questions coming in. So in case anybody wants to ask any more questions in the chat, I'll leave us on for a couple more minutes. But outside of that, I just want to, number one, thank the TA team, Jeff, Hunter. I know Jean's not on the panel, but I just want to thank you for your support to the field during this project. Ryan and Jonathan, for your participation and for you being willing to share your experience today, and Corey for your dedication and your support to Ohio Assessment Centers and to the national network as well. So for those of you who are new to the NAC, you are able to connect to us if you found this helpful. We have a lot of other resources within the association and the network. We have a resource library. We have screening and assessment tool inventories. We do a whole bunch of publications, networking opportunities, trainings for the assessment center field. So if you have any questions about that, don't hesitate to reach out. But I will, let me make sure. Oh, got it. There was, okay, perfect. I don't see any more questions. So I hope you all have a great rest of your day, a great rest of your week, a great holiday season, and we will see you in 2025. Thanks, everyone.
See you, Molly.
Bye, Corey. Thanks again.
No problem. No problem. Looking forward to getting this started.
Me too.
Hey, have a Merry Christmas. I'll talk to you soon. I think I'll talk to you tomorrow.
I'll see you tomorrow. Yeah, I'll see you tomorrow.
All right. See ya.
Thanks. Bye.